Minigames are, well, minigames. If you just think about the word, you should hopefully understand what they are. They can be very fun and addicting, but of course, there are some that will make you groan whenever you have to play them. And these are the minigames that make me feel this way, so here we go.
Start!
There are some things that don't work on certain consoles. For example, in a Game Boy Color game, having us run towards the screen is not a good idea. Even ignoring the fact that Tarzan was never actually in the stampede in the movie, this is still a heavily flawed minigame. Throughout it, your goal is to collect the bananas, which show up half a second before it's too late to grab them. That wouldn't be so bad if they didn't specifically tell you to get all the bananas. This is why it worked much better as an actual level in the PlayStation game. It may not have been my favorite level in that game, but at least that one functioned properly. The minigame doesn't even have any music, just a sound of rumbling that loops like 3 times per second. I'm not exaggerating. That's why I'm using the song that plays in the PlayStation version of this game. What would Disney themselves think of this? Well, that's assuming that their next movie they make in a few days isn't the Emoji Movie 2.0. Overall, it's a bad minigame. But to be fair, I haven't done it since I was little, but from the footage I've seen, it still looks almost impossible to get each banana. You remember how awesome it looked when Harry rode on Buckbeak in Prisoner of Azkaban? That looked like something you'd probably want to experience for yourself. But in the Game Boy Advance game, it really isn't fun. First off, because of this game's limitations, flying on him is just so slow. But that's not a problem compared to other problems I have. I understand that if it's a minigame, there should be something to actually do. But what's your objective in this one? Capturing bats. In a minigame based on something atmospheric. You couldn't even come up with something better like flying through rings or seeing how fast you can make it through a course? And lastly, controlling him is just downright awkward. You hold A instead of using the directional buttons in order to fly higher. You can only capture bats when they're gold, but you can only see them when they're from a certain distance. I've been able to stay on the ridiculous Bogart challenge for a few minutes, but I can't even survive one in this one. But what keeps it from being higher is because the developers seem like they at least tried to make it work. It's more of the Game Boy Advance's limitations which ruins this minigame. One thing that has definitely overstayed its welcome in the Sonic games is pretty much having the same Chaos Emerald challenges every time. It's not that the minigame is repetitive or anything, at least not yet, but if I listed off every Sonic game that includes running in a tube-shaped course trying to get rings and avoiding spike balls, that would take up half the video. But mark my words, when I say that I'd rather have that than the Chaos Emerald missions that we have in Sonic Advance 3. Unlike in some other Sonic games where it's very simple to unlock the minigames, this time it isn't. After finding 10 shell that are randomly scattered around each level in the zone, which, should I mention, these zones are extremely overexpansive, but then that's not enough. Now you need to find a special key, which is also hidden in these levels, which, once again, are overexpansive, making finding the key near impossible. And you can't just exit the level with the key, you have to actually beat the level first. Talk about incredibly picky. And then you finally get access to the special stages. Now you are listening to stupid music, and you are flying on a plane through a very repetitive section where you need to get enough rings. But because of the somewhat low depth perception on the Game Boy Advance, combined with how horrible the controls are, and because you can't get to the other side of the screen fast enough, you're going to miss rings. And the worst part is that if you lose, you once again have to go into the same oversized levels in order to get another key. Just great. You know what I hate? When games get a little too trollish. I'm not saying it's always wrong for them to troll us, but once you get to the minigame Run Run Roddy Tops, you'll likely know what I'm talking about. Some will say this isn't a minigame, but to me it fits the qualifications for a minigame, so it counts. Roddy Tops apparently injured her legs after being bit by the Emperor Spider and can't move as a result. So you must now carry her through a long section, but if you get hit once, you lose instantly. So you really have to take your time, because enemies keep coming in out of nowhere, giving you no time to react. And the best part? It feels like this minigame drags on forever. And it gets even more insulting when you find out that Roddy Tops was just fine this whole time. Being the wonderful, wonderful friend she is, she was just taking advantage of your kindness. So that means we did this unpleasant minigame for nothing. For shame, Roddy Tops. For shame. Target test was a great idea. It's a great test of skill of how you know how to play as the characters, because each of the 12 characters had their own target test course. They really did think about how each of the characters play out. Melee had the same deal, except now that it had 25 characters, we had more target test stages than the amount of target tests and board the platform stages in the original combined. Then, Brawl came out, and its target test was super disappointing. Now there are only 5 different target tests, each one of a different difficulty setting. It no longer takes advantage of each character's abilities anymore, and playing through it with all 35 characters gets tiresome after a while, but then again I guess I can't be too mad. I mean, it's probably not easy to create 35 different target test stages in a game that already has months worth of content. So what excuse do they have for the way they handled target tests in Smash 4? They pretty much made it into a clone of Home Run contest with how you keep hitting something and then sending it flying. Except this time, it's as if Sakurai was like, time to get working on target tests for the next Smash. Oh look, this Angry Birds game is really popular, so maybe that would be a great replacement. But what Sakurai failed to understand was that what makes something a good idea in Angry Birds won't automatically be a good idea in a fighting game. Since there's no slingshot, it's much harder to aim in what direction the bomb goes in.
A slingshot? You think this is about the slingshot?
Well, it pretty much is. I sincerely hope that Sakurai has a much better target test idea in Smash Ultimate, assuming he didn't confirm it outside of the directs. Crash Team Racing took a pretty big risk with its crystal challenges. Having to get 20 crystals before time runs out sounds like a fair deal, but when you're in a cart and have to keep slowing yourself down to position yourself just right, it just doesn't mix well. And I might also add the fact that the way they use the Wumpa Fruit sound effect for when you grab them is a pretty strange choice. Probably the most annoying challenge of them all, however, is Rampage Ruins. Now, there are crystals that you need to be at near maximum speed to get, and if you miss them, you have to take a whole 10 seconds for another chance. 10 seconds may not be that long, but you have a pretty short time limit, so you're gonna need all the time you can get. The next problem is this level's overly complicated layout. I wouldn't mind that, but when we have a challenge like this, that makes getting all the crystals feel like a chore. But the worst part is that TNT crates are littered everywhere throughout this track. If you get a TNT crate on your head, you have to drop what you're doing and start hopping, which slows you down by the way, in order to get it off you. Or else it'll blow up on you. And if you run into another TNT crate when you have this one on you, kablamo. When I was younger, I used to call this track TNT Court. Nitro Court may have nitro crates which are worse than the TNT crates, but at least that level has a somewhat simple layout making it easy to navigate, but this one isn't. Man, it feels like even though I like Yoshi's New Island, I always have something negative to say about it. Usually about its terrible final boss. But since this list is about minigames, let's talk about that. One thing they went backwards with was the vehicle transformations. In the first game, it was fun turning into vehicles to change up the gameplay in certain rooms. But now they're all minigames that are separate rooms from the rest of the level, and they replace the real minigames. Now, they're not all bad, but the submarine. Oh boy, the submarine. This thing controls with gyroscope controls. Now, I've heard some defensive arguments about gyroscope controls, with how they make your aim more precise. But when trying to move your character, it just feels sloppy, especially if you're playing in the car or on a plane. Isn't the whole purpose of portable gaming being able to play the game even when you're not at home? Also, you have to keep shooting the walls, but you're probably going to end up shooting your torpedoes the wrong way because of the controls, so you have to keep bumping into the walls until your torpedoes finally hit. Needless to say, this minigame gives me a sinking feeling. One common trope in video games that gets a lot of well-deserved hate is when we are gifted with the glory of rapid input sequences. Having to rapidly hit the button will tire out your hands really easily. So let's look at one that's all about button mashing. I understand that the reason it's like this is to give the feeling of pushing a heavy object, but that's not what I bought a Star Fox game to do. If you thought you were done with the Lightfoot Village's test of strength, just you wait until you reach the Krazoa version of it. Okay, Rareware, which one of you geniuses decided to make us do this minigame twice? And if you can believe it, they actually made this minigame even worse. This time you have to push it farther than you did the first time, since now, instead of a quarter turn, you have to push it a half turn. Not to mention this one is bigger than in the first one. The worst part is that if you lose, you have to start this tempo all over again. Thankfully, it's not a very long temple though, at least when compared to most temples in video games.
Finish!
Donkey Kong 64's minigames are pretty much a mixed bag. While there are some minigames that I would definitely not mind playing multiple times, others are just as fun as getting hit by an avalanche of coconuts. Especially beaver bother. How hard does it have to be to wrangle up a few beavers? Well, pretty hard apparently. Your objective is to scare them into a hole. The problem is how much space there is for the naughties to run around the hole, which is just a small dot. Making them go into the hole is a really difficult and annoying task because of how the hole that you need to scare them into takes up like not even a tenth of the barrel. Getting them to go to where you want them to go to is really aggravating because of this. Why couldn't the hole have been a bit bigger or on the edge of the barrel instead of in the middle where it's so easy for them to go around? Overall, this is just a cheap minigame, and I don't see what gave them the idea to do this. I wish this was as bad as they get, but, well, unfortunately, it isn't. The Mario Party series are a ton of fun with their multiple minigames, but some aren't so great, such as the rapid input ones, but the worst ones are the luck-based ones. Because when you lose them, it's not even going to be your fault that you lost, and one of them takes the top spot on this list. I was going to go with Bowser's Big Blast for being the minigame that we have to blame for all these terrible luck-based games, but unfortunately, we recently got one that actually manages to be 10 times worse. My most hated minigame is Don't Wake Wiggler. Now this seems like a really calm and beautiful dreamlike minigame, like something out of 3D World or Galaxy. You're petting a cute creature that's sleeping, while a gorgeous music track plays, and the scenery looks amazing. Sure, it's kinda luck-based because if he wakes up on your turn, you will lose all your points, and petting the Wiggler does feel a bit awkward with the motion controls, but at least it's still a calming and beautiful minigame that couldn't possibly... What the heck, Nintendo? That was just plain mean. You have such a lovely minigame, and then you suddenly jump scare us. And did you have to have his face so close to the screen when it happens? It's not even funny. I was this close to forgiving the fact that this minigame is partially luck-based and feels a bit finicky, but then you did this. Do you really want to traumatize children? Why would our characters even want to pet a notoriously short-tempered creature anyway? I mean, I know that this kingdom is ruled by one of the most oblivious idiots in media, but come on! Now, I'm not saying that mood whiplash can never work, but it's really hard to pull off. And if you can't do it without making people want to kill themselves, don't try it at all. But the thing that pins it to the #1 spot is that this is the only minigame I've ever played that practically ruined my experience with the whole game. I know that sounds stupid. I mean, to make it come off like you hate an entire game because of one minigame. So, how does it nearly ruin my experience? Because ever since I first played it, for the rest of the game, instead of wondering what other minigames this game has in store for us, I was constantly worried that this atrocious minigame would come up again. Call me a coward, but I'll have you know I've enjoyed some notoriously scary horror movies, and enjoy certain horror elements in games. This is where I draw the line. Like I said, getting too trollish in video games isn't always a good idea, and this is exactly why. It's the worst thing media has given us this year ever since that terrible Rampage movie came out last spring. This game's finicky, horribly luck-based, it's very likely to traumatize children, and it practically ruined my experience with an otherwise really good game. And that is why it is what I think is the worst minigame ever.